Today's show is sponsored by Yafa Bay and her Spirit of Tepereth Metaphysical Marketplace, here to provide you and your naturally special gifts with guidance and support through your life's journey, providing you tools such as candles, incense, charms, jewelry, oils, crystals, and much more. Visit them at 1273 West Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio, or online at spiritoftepereth.com. You can find all our sponsors' information in the show notes on our website. Now let's start the show.
The controversial group leading the charge, ADOS, or the American Descendants of Slavery. The controversial group ADOS, ADOS, or the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, ADOS, the American Descendants of the controversial group ADOS, the controversial group ADOS.
Welcome to the Articles of ADOS podcast, the weekly show where we bring you undiscussed news, articles, and information important to the American descendants of slavery, our friends, and our allies. This is episode 7. I'm your host, Lisa and Daud, along with my co-host,
Daud Giazon. On today's show, we will share articles from NPR, The Atlantic, Market Watch, Newsweek, and the Heritage Foundation Online. Later in the show, stay tuned for our main event, where we dive into an interview. The coronavirus was an emergency until Trump found out who was dying.
Personality.
Peace.
This week in our personality piece, I'm going to pose a question so we can show off these great personalities we have.
Okay, what questions do you have for us this week?
Should ADOS support a candidate if they only promise 50% of the agenda, but not all? Or reparations is not a part of the plan?
That is a good question. I don't want to answer it.
Well,
that's how good it is.
Mark had brought it up once before in one of our meetings. You know, the candidates are presenting their campaign platforms that may include some things that we want, but not all things. Can that candidate be supported, in your view?
Okay. All right. I got to be hard-nosed here. No, we should not settle for anything less. Reparations needs to be on the agenda. Personally, I've been in this space since 2000 because of what they did to us then. I patiently waited for us to wake up, and people decided to have hope and dreams satisfied through Obama land. I knew it would have to wait then. And so by 2012, I thought it would really take off. It didn't. People were still holding out, but I had a lot less people being argumentative because they too were disappointed. They just didn't want to admit it. So here we are. We're almost through the first term of Trump, which is there because Obama and Clinton helped to create him. And so our children since 2014 have been killing themselves on our watch. And no one has systematically on a large scale answered to this call. We give them comments for wearing their pants low. We give them comments for saying things that come out of the radios that are run by people that don't live in our communities. So those are easy targets. They need us to say no more. We understand institutional racist violence, and we demand policies that adhere to those problems, because both we and they, the elite, the powerful, have allowed and manifested this situation to happen. We need to stand firm on our demands because we have a lot to make up for. Reparations should always be on the table. We can diddle around with percentages in other areas, but reparation needs to be on the table all the time across the board. That should be our demand. That should be our consistency and expectation.
From here on out.
From here on out.
From here on out. I agree. And which is why vote for blue, no matter who, doesn't make sense. Which is why voting for the lesser of two evils, as you mentioned before, doesn't work. The only thing that's going to work is you stand in your ground and you stand in your position. And our position, ADOS position, is reparations and a black agenda. So Joe Biden's Lift Every Voice plan does not include that. Therefore, his candidacy should not be supported. I've said it, and a lot of people, well, I ain't gonna say a lot. I've said this before and didn't quite go over too well, but sometimes you have to lose an election before you get what you want. You can't keep giving them your vote and expecting something different. They're just going to give you plans to shut you up and not plans to fix your life. Reparations needs to be a part of that to fix your life. It puts us on a level playing field, and then the Black agenda continues that level playing field as we move forward. So if a candidate is not offering you that, he's not the right candidate for your community.
And your children's very lives.
So consider that. We can't tell you who to vote for, but consider that in your, in the way that you move forward in your voter education and in your voter strategy.
Catch the fire. If you're ADOS, an ally or friend, we encourage you to connect with a local ADOS chapter and help change your local politics. Our ADOS Ohio chapter in Columbus meets every fourth Sunday of the month. For more information on the time and location, visit adoscolumbus.org.
We have our first Catch the Fire announcement. Family, we are proud to announce through the work of Triangle ADOS, the Phase 4 Emergency COVID-19 Relief for Black Americans petition, who along with concerned Black American citizens, CBAC, is pushing an initiative to get COVID-19 relief for Black Americans. And they need your support. To support this initiative, number 1, sign the petition. Number 2, contact your representative about the COVID-19 initiative plan. And number 3, forward the petition to 3 to 5 people. For more information, go to cbacusa.org or wethepeople.com and sign the petition. We have until June 4th to gather over 100,000 signatures. So we need your help, family. Share the petition, sign the petition, get the word out.
I sent it to 35 people and Facebook shut me down. That's when I had that problem after I passed that out. You're spamming people.
You're being censored if you're asking for help out here. So space it out. Maybe 5 an hour. But share the petition once you sign it and get the word out that we need 100,000 signatures for the White House to even consider our petition.
Are you busy? Is the news coming so fast you can barely keep up? No worries. The Articles of ADOS podcast is here to help. Hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening right now, and we'll make sure you stay up to date on the news and information that affects you and your ADOS life. In today's Rapid News Reports, we have some articles that you may have missed, all in some way may affect you and your ADOS life. Up first, we have
Trump campaign reworks its pitch to Black voters after pandemic slams economy. Before the corona crisis decimated the U.S. economy, the record low unemployment rate for African Americans was the backbone of President Trump's re-election pitch to Black voters. It was always a tough sell, given his past performance with African Americans. Now it's even tougher after the pandemic has erased economic gains and forced the campaign to adjust its message in its outreach to Black voters. Early government data show that Black employees are losing work at a higher rate than white workers. That's on top of devastating health impacts, with African Americans being hospitalized more and dying at much higher rates from the virus. We're doing everything in our power to address this challenge and provide support to African American citizens of this country who are going through a lot. But it's been disproportional. They're getting hit very, very hard, Trump stated at a briefing in early April. Trump has directed his White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council to focus on minority communities affected by the coronavirus. The council, headed by Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson, is supposed to identify additional funding needs for these areas. Publication, NPR, writer Aisha Roscoe. I graded this article a good. Actually, I don't know why I did that, but the information in it was necessary for the ADOS. Be aware that the White House is trying to pitch you on an idea that our economy is good, at the same time trying to address that it's not good. So which is it? Is it good or is it not good? We know that it is not good, and so hopefully Ben Carson can figure out a way that he could address economic depression that we're under. Up next,
from the publication Market Watch, titled Majority of New COVID-19 Hospitalizations in New York Are People Who Stayed at Home. Tagline, 96% also have underlying health issues, according to data revealed by Governor Andrew Cuomo. They aren't frontline workers. They aren't riding New York City subways. They aren't stuck in jails or homeless shelters or other congregate facilities where the disease could spread easily. The vast majority of New Yorkers still walking into hospitals with COVID-19 have been sheltering at home and avoiding mass transit. Very few were even traveling on foot or in their own cars on a daily basis, according to a survey of new patients from over 100 hospitals across the state over a 3-day span. Of those surveyed, 66% were at home before entering the hospital. Governor Andrew Cuomo, who presents the preliminary findings on Wednesday, said they underscored the need for people to double down on protecting themselves and their families with things like masks, hand washing, and stay away from the most vulnerable. We were thinking that maybe we were going to find a higher percentage of essential employees were getting sick because they were going to work. That this maybe was nurses, doctors, transit workers. That's not the case, Cuomo said. Some 83% of new patients are out of work or retired and aren't even leaving their home on a daily basis. This is a surprise. Overwhelmingly, the people were at home, he added. The persistent spread of the disease prompted questions about who, such as medical staff, inmates, or nursing home residents, needed better protection, but that largely wasn't the case. Of the 1,270 new patients surveyed, 18% were from nursing homes across New York State, 4% were from assisted living facilities, 2% were homeless, and less than 1% were from prisons or jails. 2 in 3 people coming into hospitals with the virus were simply at home, Cuomo said. On top of that, only 4% of those newly infected said they took public transportation on a daily basis. We thought maybe they were taking public transportation, and we've taken special precautions, but no. These people were literally at home, Cuomo said. There were also less surprising statistics. Minorities comprised a disproportionate amount of new cases, reflecting known health disparities. Most new cases are happening downstate, which has been the epicenter of the outbreak since the beginning. More than half of all the new COVID patients were from New York City, including 21% from Manhattan, 18% were from Long Island, and 11% from Westchester and Rockland counties, both directly north of the city. Another unsurprising statistic is that 96% of those hospitalized in recent days have underlying health issues, things like cancer, asthma, and diabetes, that can make COVID-19 more severe. 3 in 4 new patients were 51 or older. The author, Becky Strum, I grade this bad because it misses the overall point that ADOS were disproportionately going to be targeted by this illness simply because of the history of white domination racism, and that they had a heads up for this and failed the ADOS community by not providing them adequate support, as well as helping them live in homes that were more likely disproportionately impacted by pollution that other homes are not. And because of that, as ADOS has been quarantined in their homes, they've been doing so in more toxic environments that has made catching any virus or any illness much more likely. And next,
the near certainty of a Black Depression. Tagline: recessions are always racist. This one could be catastrophic. Black Americans experience recessions the way front seat passengers do head-on collisions. During the Great Depression, when national unemployment reached 24%, Black unemployment neared 50%. During the Great Recession, when national unemployment reached 9%, Black unemployment topped 16%. Today, as COVID-19 slams into the economy, Black Americans again brace for the brunt of the crash. Though official numbers from the Department of Labor have yet to be released, CUNY labor economist Michelle Holder calculates that white unemployment hit 16% in April and Black unemployment hit 20%. She considers those calculations conservative. Forecasts based on federal unemployment insurance claims stands bolstered by other labor economists who warned of spiking jobless rates with stark racial disparities in recent days. We are in a depression-like time, says Holder. This depression will likely be uneven. Looking back over the past 30 years, you can't find a recession that hasn't been more severe for black workers than for whites. It's just history. Moving forward, black laborers can expect higher unemployment as they are underrepresented in the white-collar jobs that are more easily done from home over Zoom or Slack. Perennially crushed by lending bias, battered by employment discrimination, and neglected by high interest rates, Black Americans stand poised to be ravaged by COVID-19 downturn. Publication, Vox, writer Aaron Ross Coleman. I graded this score a good. If not already here, ADOS should brace themselves for the upcoming depression, the one that will hit us the hardest. And up next,
from the publication Newsweek, entitled 81% of NYPD's social distancing summonses were issued to blacks and Latinos. It's the new stop and frisk. From the publication, data released Friday by the New York Police Department shows that 81% of coronavirus enforcement summonses from March 16th to May 5th were issued to black and Latino residents. Of the 374 summonses issued in regard to social distancing, the respondents for 193 of those summonses were black and the respondents for 11 of those summonses were Hispanic. An NYPD press release said, "It's the new form of stop and frisk." Melissa Mark Viverito, the former New York City Council Speaker and current congressional candidate for New York's 15th District, told Newsweek, "We went through this battle with stop and frisk, of the disproportionate enforcement and over-criminalizing of our communities. It's a mentality that continues to permeate, but unfortunately it doesn't surprise me." Whites, who are 32% of the population of New York City, only received 51 summonses, accounting for 13% of them. The data comes after images and videos were widely shared online of police interactions with residents of color that drew criticism, including Officer Francisco X. Garcia violently knocking down a bystander after a social distancing violation by two separate people. In the cell phone video, Garcia can be seen angrily throwing the bystander, who is black, to the ground, while repeatedly punching him and sitting on him until another officer handcuffed him. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio said Tuesday that what he saw was absolutely unacceptable, noting that Garcia was swiftly taken off the street by the NYPD and an investigation was opened. De Blasio was sought to frame incidents like those as exceptions, not the rule, in the course of responding to a pandemic, and not as widespread a problem as the stop and frisk policy, which he criticized after it blossomed under his predecessor, Mike Bloomberg. The data on summonses comes just a day after the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office released arrest figures showing that out of the 40 people who were arrested due to coronavirus social distancing social distancing enforcement, 35 were black, 4 were Latino, and 1 was white. The figures were released as New York City continues to battle COVID-19 crisis that has disproportionately affected blacks and Latinos in terms of infections and death rates. Asked for comment by Newsweek about these figures in light of the pandemic, the NYPD's Public Information Office copy and pasted the first paragraph of its press release, noting that the summonses were based on 1 million contacts with the public for acts likely to spread disease and to violate emergency measures. Mark Viverito, like many New Yorkers and respondents on social media, noted that violations of emergency measures did not seem to apply when it was predominantly white people hanging out on piers and in parks with photos emerging of officers handing them masks. It's disgusting and it's unacceptable, and the mayor is not taking it seriously, Mark Viverito said. Advocates have fought to bring transparency and accountability to the NYPD, and you feel you've made some progress, but maybe not so much. Author Adrian Carrasquillo and I graded this fair. It was good that it included the connections to the same types of mentality that exacerbate these problems. At the same time, it falls short of identifying how this is the same old behavioral dynamic that comes from institutional racist violence against ADOS communities. And I also must note that the article itself doesn't just say in numbers blacks and Hispanics. It's overwhelmingly blacks. Just look at the numbers from the article. And next,
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has nothing to say about Ahmaud Arbery. Quote, we get straight to it. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has been quiet throughout this Ahmaud Arbery video. This story has been around at least for a good week. Now mainstream media picked up on it. Small and medium outlets like myself were talking about it since last week, and she has nothing to say. Where is all the people of color talk? Where is all that black and brown talk? The only time she has anything to say is when it's time for her to either specifically benefit from black struggle, or if she feels that she can piggyback off of black struggle to get benefits for her people. That's the only time she has anything to say. But when it comes to anything that's directly affecting us, and it comes in solutions that directly benefit us, she's quiet. This comes from the YouTube video by TD Hip Hop Media from the creator Tony Delorme. I graded this video a good. He goes on to give examples of how AOC does not have a position on our issues unless she can tag on the people of color to the issue. The video is great in exposing this grift that she does. And up next,
from the publication, The Heritage Foundation, entitled The Invention of Hispanics, what it says about the politics of race. America's surging politics of victimhood and identitarian division did not emerge organically or inevitably, as many believe. Nor are these practices the result of irresponsible demands by minorities for recognition or for redress of past wrongs, as we are constantly told. Those explanations are myths spread by the activists, intellectuals, and philanthropists who set out deliberately beginning at mid-century to redefine our country. Their goal was mass mobilization of political ends, and one of their earliest targets was the Mexican-American community. These activists strived purposely to turn Americans of this community, who mostly resided in the Southwest states, against their countrymen, teaching them first to see themselves as a racial minority, and then to think of themselves as the core of a pan-ethnic victim group of Hispanics, a fabricated term with no basis in ethnicity, culture, or race. This transformation took effort because many Mexican Americans had traditionally seen themselves as white. When the 1930 census classified Mexican Americans as a race, leaders of the community protested vehemently and had the classification changed back to white in the very next census. The most prominent Mexican American organization at the time, the patriotic Pro-Assimilationist League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, complained that declassifying Mexicans as white had been an attempt to discriminate between the Mexicans themselves and other members of the white race, when in truth and fact, we are not only a part and parcel, but as well the sum and substance of the white race, tracing their ancestry in part to the Spanish who conquered South and Central America. They regarded themselves as offshoots of white Europeans. Such views may surprise readers today, but this was the way many Mexican Americans saw their race until mid-century. Most Mexican Americans simply did not think they had suffered oppression akin to that of blacks. This actually came clear in Yelkover's 1966 Ford Foundation funded mega study, which revealed a deep ambivalence on the topic. Based on the interviews with 1,550 residents of Los Angeles and San Antonio, the findings were published by UCLA researchers Leo Gerber, Joan Moore, and Ralph Guzman under the title The Mexican American People, the nation's second largest minority. As the title suggests, the study was designed to prove that Mexican Americans constituted a racial minority whose grievances raised or lowered it to victimhood and therefore entitled to benefit. But even the study's authors admitted that the narrative was flawed. Prejudice has been a loaded topic of conversation in any Mexican American community, they wrote. Indeed, merely calling Mexican Americans a minority and implying that the population is the victim of prejudice and discrimination has caused irritation among many who prefer to believe themselves indistinguishable from white Americans. There are light-skinned Mexican Americans who have never experienced the faintest discrimination in public facilities, and many with ambiguous surnames have also escaped the experiences of the more conspicuous members of the group. Author Mike Gonzalez, I grade this a fair, It did a good job of displaying the history of Mexican Americans being able to pass as white among their hierarchy who strive to make that happen. At the same time, it did a poor job of utilizing the connection between what has happened after that mid-century period, where Nixon dubbed them Hispanic and used them and that group, which is an amalgamation of several different ethnic and indigenous groups that were placed all into the category of Hispanic in order to supplant ADOS. And next?
Finally, we have an article shared in our Facebook group by Mary Withers titled, Police Stop Fewer Black Drivers at Night When a Veil of Darkness Obscures Their Race. Tagline, the Stanford-led study also found that when drivers were pulled over, officers searched the cars of blacks and Hispanics more than whites. The largest ever study of alleged racial profiling during traffic stops has found that blacks who are pulled over more frequently than whites by day are much less likely to be stopped after sunset, when a veil of darkness masks their race. That is one of the several examples of systematic bias that emerged from a 5-year study that analyzed 95 million traffic stop records filed by officers with 21 state patrol agencies and 35 municipal police forces from 2011 to 2018. The Stanford-led study also found that when drivers were pulled over, officers searched the cars of blacks and Hispanics more often than whites. Researchers also found that in 2 states that legalized marijuana, although overall searches decreased, they found minorities were still more likely than whites to have their cars searched after a pullover. Our results indicate that police stops and search decisions suffer from persistent racial bias and point to the value of police interventions to mitigate these disparities. Publication, Eureka Alert, writers, Stanford School of Engineering. I graded this article a good.
And that's it for this week's Rapid News. All articles featured will be posted in our Facebook group and in the show notes on our website.
Time now for the main event.
In this week's main event, we will interview the article, The Coronavirus Was an Emergency Until Trump Found Out Who Was Dying. Tagline, the pandemic has exposed the bitter terms of our racial contract, which deems certain lives of greater value than others. From the publication The Atlantic, writer Adam Serwer will be interviewed. Daud will ask the questions and I will give the answers.
My first question is, the premise of your article is what?
Once the disproportionate impact of the epidemic was revealed to the American political and financial elite, many began to regard the rising death toll less as a national emergency than as an inconvenience.
You connect recent racial disparities, such as the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery, to the COVID response. How is there a connection?
To see the sequence of events that led to Arbery's death as benign requires a cascade of assumptions. One must assume that 2 men arming themselves and chasing down a stranger running through their neighborhood is a normal occurrence. One must assume that the 2 armed white men had a right to self-defense and that the black man suddenly confronted by armed strangers did not. The racial contract is a codicil rendered in invisible ink, one stating that the rules as written do not apply to non-white people in the same way. The racial contract is not partisan. It guides staunch conservatives and sensitive liberals alike, but it works most effectively when it remains imperceptible to its beneficiaries. As long as it is invisible, members of society can proceed as though the provisions of the social contract apply equally to everyone.
What is the COVID contract you introduced?
A new clause to the racial contract. The lives of disproportionately black and brown workers are being sacrificed to fuel the engine of a faltering economy by a president who disdains them. This is the COVID contract.
Who is bearing the burden of keeping our broken economy from sinking?
Workers at the front lines of the pandemic, such as meat packers, transportation workers, and grocery clerks, have been deemed so worthless that legislators want to immunize their employers from liability even as they force them to work under unsafe conditions.
Early on, who was most affected with coronavirus and when did it shift?
Those early cases tied to international travel ensnared many members of the global elite. American celebrities, world leaders, and those with close ties to Trump himself. On April 7th, major outlets began reporting that preliminary data showed that Black and Latino Americans were being disproportionately felled by the coronavirus. That night, the Fox News host Tucker Carlson announced it hasn't been the disasters that we feared. His colleagues, Brit Hume, mused that the disease turned out not to be quite as dangerous as we thought.
So the conversation moved from a national emergency to let's restart the economy. When?
By April 16th, the day the first anti-lockdown protests began, deaths had more than doubled to more than 30,000. And more Americans were dying was less important than who was dying.
Once the data showed that the most affected communities were Black and Latino, white anger started rising.
Containing the outbreak was no longer a question of social responsibility, but of personal responsibility. From the White House podium, Surgeon General Jerome Adams told communities of color that we need you to step up and help stop the spread. Public health restrictions designed to contain the outbreak were deemed absurd. They seemed, in Carlson's words, a weird kind of arbitrary fascism. To restrict the freedom of white Americans just because non-white Americans are dying is an egregious violation of the racial contract.
Who is stoking this notion that we should just get back to work?
The wealthy luminaries of conservative media have sought to couch their position to restrictions as advocacy on behalf of workers. But polling shows that most vulnerable to both the disease and economic catastrophe want the outbreak contained before they return to work.
Could the White House also be involved in agitation and fear?
The president's cavalier attitude is at least in part a reflection of his fear that the economic downturn caused by this coronavirus will doom his political fortunes in November. But what connects the rise of the anti-lockdown protests, the president's dismissal of the carnage predicted by his own administration, and the eagerness of governors all over the country to reopen the economy before developing the capacity to do so safely, is the sense that those they consider regular folks will be fine.
So in the end, conservative voices are the loudest and most angry in the face of the data showing they are less affected.
Collective solidarity in response to the coronavirus remains largely intact. Most Americans support the restrictions and are not eager to sacrifice their lives or those of their loved ones for a few points of gross domestic product. The consistency across incomes and backgrounds is striking in an era of severe partisan polarization. But solidarity with the rest of the nation among elite Republicans, those whose lives and self-conceptions are intertwined with the success of the Trump presidency, began eroding as soon as the disproportionate impact of the outbreak started to emerge.
Well, that completes this interview. Thank you for your time and information. Coming up, we have the commentary on this article. Did we like it? Did we hate it? Stay tuned.
We want to take the time to give our friends and listeners a shout out. Thank you for clicking that subscribe button and for liking and sharing the podcast. You can also continue supporting the show by joining our Patreon, where you can receive exclusive content and promotional items for as little as $3 a month. Sponsoring the show will ensure that we can continue to bring you the news and information important to your ADOS life. So head on over and join us at patreon.com/articles of ADOS. All right, what did we think of this article? First of all, it tried to connect recent current events with Ahmaud and to the COVID-19. In that connection, he's stating that, okay, there's this unwritten rule, this silent rule that our society accepts unequal racial responses to these type of events. So I see where he was going with that connection. He stated that once the data showed that the Black community, one, was being most affected and dying faster than the larger society, is when the shift in response began. And that was prior to this data. It was a national emergency, shut everything down, step in and do all these type of precautions. It was social distancing to the max. And once the data showed that the Black community is hit the hardest, it began to, it's not so bad. It also, and it connected it to that, it's not so bad because conservative talk radio and conservative television expressed that it's not so bad type of talk, and that all of these shutdowns were fascism. It wasn't fascism prior to when they thought everybody was being affected. The reporter is saying that only after the data showed that ADOS was most effective, then it's fascism. I've seen, of course, the protests happen, and then, you'll get signs like, the shutdown is slavery. That connection I can see happening and being viable idea, because it was the truth. Once the data started showing that Black people were dying the most, stuff started changing, and then all of a sudden it's like we got to get back to work. I think it would have, if the data had shown that we all were dying at the same rate, the protests would have came later. I don't think it would. I think it would have happened. I think people eventually would have been like, they would looked at the numbers and be like, oh, it wouldn't have been race data. It would have been numbers data. Mm-hmm. They could have just looked at the death rates and been like, not as many people are dying as, the hundreds of thousands that they were predicting. Mm-hmm. So that could have also been a catalyst for protests. But I believe the protests came quicker once they realized that our community was being affected the most.
I agree with your assessment within the context of believing everything the government said about how dangerous the virus was. It and it alone holds validity, but only within that context. Outside that context, the concern, also the assessment, is off track, and it's going to play a role in making things worse. Here's why. We have been set up into a false dichotomy. I'll make it simply, between those who want to get back to work, to get back to making money, to get back to the way things were. We've got that camp, and they are willing to tolerate whatever deaths may result from that. Okay, that's the one portion of the dichotomy. The other portion of the dichotomy are the people that are really concerned about how dangerous the virus is and are very concerned about being disproportionately, especially those types of workers whose lives will be on the line because of how dangerous the virus is. And therefore, there's this clash. I submit for our listeners to consider this is the same sort of game that's played between the good cop, bad cop mentality represented by the Republican right and the Democratic left. We are still losing no matter our devotion to one of those outcomes. I submit we'll still lose as a result if we allow this mentality of the validity first that's coming from the same source up to the virulence of the virus. Now, the reality is ADOS has always suffered disproportionately from flu season in terms of illness and in death, especially because we were the lower caste workers. They're calling it essential workers. Isn't that good of them? Instead of helping to change our condition. So, given that, I will post a chart showing from the CDC from 1999 to 2017, you will see that we have disproportionately died from every seasonal flu, from every influenza and virus that could have taken us out, was always happening except for 3 years. So out of 21 years, we were always suffering disproportionately. For 3 years, we weren't. It was the Native American. This is a false argument that all of a sudden in 2020, we've got to be concerned about what's always been happening. Now, why is that? The numbers of how virulent COVID-19 was exaggerated from the beginning. From the other podcast, last podcast, podcast 6, where it was clearly indicated that the Gates Foundation played a role in hyping up the numbers. The numbers had been re-estimated by the WHO that went down to 60,000. We're now a bit above that now because we're now out of season. So they're counting additional deaths after the season. Again, because there's still interest in hyping it up. So why would Bill Gates want that done? You all know the answer to that. He's in league and involved with the vaccine aspect. So that's another reason why we're not including that into what's going on in our disagreement. We are not considering other alternatives and things that are going on here. We just accept the government's interpretation of how scared we should be and how dangerous things are. So it's already dangerous because the COVID-19 is being connected to seasonal flu that happens regularly, that we always have consistently since 1999 been dying of. We've already heard the reports of how doctors are being pressured and even paid off to label things COVID-19. So that accelerates the numbers. And so it's natural that people would have the concern that being sent back into work, they're more likely going to catch the virus and therefore the problem.
Well, in the article, I think his focus is on how our government and white domination racism, and racists, and so yes, Rush Limbaugh, we will call you a racist if you want to get back to the economy that you don't have to participate in. But in this article, the reporter, I think he's trying to, in a long way around the circle, is say that our government just really don't care about ADOS, Black Americans, and our pain and struggle. No matter if it's, if we're asking for help or if they see that we need help, it goes on deaf ears. When they were not aware that the numbers were going to show that we were most impacted, it was a national emergency. It was. And once the numbers came in, it wasn't. No, things are bad, and they're bad for our community, and we need to get our leaders who were giving town halls weekly talking about what's wrong with the community and not asking for the check, not petitioning for the check. If you're at the table, ask for what we need.
This is a bit complicated, and that's why you have to be patient to understand that they're setting up these false dichotomies between those who want to go back to work and an interest that want people to go back to work and the needs of the people. I'm suggesting very strongly that this is a part of a plan to get people in need of both vaccines, more monitoring, and this is what I didn't get to, and more monitoring of Black bodies for more social control. No one's even looking at that because we've been divided into these camps we've got to care about, instead of focusing on the very thing you did say there towards the end, that no matter what's going on, we're going to be disproportionately facing the death. So therefore, like the COVID relief attempt, those are the things we should be focusing on. But notice, because we're in this false dichotomy, we're not really focused on that. Think about that. What are our national leaders discussing? They're talking about digging in heels against the right, trying to get people back to work. They're not focusing on how this has always been a disproportionate problem for the ADOS group and how they need redress for that into the future. That's why I'm saying we're getting lost in their fight ultimately, scared for our personhood, but we have to extend our personhood beyond just getting through the COVID crises they've created. Now, if they cared about our livelihoods, all Americans' livelihoods, they would have focused on our immune systems and given us instructions to improve them, along with securing the elderly, the comorbidity that exists for Americans, and securing those people that are disproportionately in areas where pollution is significant, which is another reason why they let go focusing on law enforcement of the EPA. They did that knowing that people could create lawsuits centered around their ill health brought about by living in such proximities when the virus came and when the virus arrived. So they limited those. See, that's the reason why this is a false dichotomy, because they took that out of the discussion. We focus on it as another bad thing that Trump's doing when Obama would have done the same thing. He literally did with in Detroit with the drinking water thing.
With the article, I think their focus is on Trump administration and the conservatives.
And that's a good old way to get people fired up and off focus.
But it is the truth, though, is what happened. You know, the best. I'm gonna keep bringing it back to it. They were on a national emergency.
I've already conceded. That's correct, because it also helps to sell the dynamic. All good propaganda works with truth.
All right. Well, that's it for today's main event. Listeners, you can read this full article on our website in this week's show notes.
Today, in Serious Questions with Daud, that's me, I'll take a listener's question and give commentary on any topic, whether social, economic, cultural, or political. Serious questions get serious answers. Send your questions to Daud, D-A-U-D, at articlesofados.com. Our question today comes from D. And D writes, "Hi, I have a serious question. I don't believe our government when it comes to the coronavirus, but I do believe black people are dying. So how is herd immunity going to help people that are dying?" It's a very good question.
Good question.
We sort of covered this in our commentary on the last segment on the main event. Well, here I'll get even more specific. All right, save the best for you, D. Number one, we have always been practicing herd immunity. The essential workers are practicing it right now. From 1999 till today, black ADOS human beings and our immune systems have been decimated by the seasonal flu that has been on occasion accompanied by a difficult virus for the human body to handle. Number two, so on the CDC's own website, you will find a graph of this period where there are just 3-year exceptions to our constant disproportionate deaths. Yet there was no fanfare, no calls for mass quarantines, no losses of jobs or businesses. We were practicing herd immunity. Number three, according to several scientists who've abdicated for the herd immunity approach where healthier segments of the population are able to handle the load of a virus and convert it into something harmless, while people with immunities that are less strong will get sick, but still convert the virus into something harmless, while those with comorbid health challenges, mainly among the elderly, will disproportionately those of high age will be more seriously challenged, which would result in a few of them dying, while those who remain will have a better chance of survival from future viruses because the immune system would be stronger. According to these scientists, mass quarantines have worked to prolong the problem so that the bulk of the virus mutation that will result in a second wave, especially into the next flu season, will present disproportionate health problems and challenges among the world's population who followed this quarantine approach, with humans less capable of fighting off this second wave because their immune systems were not allowed to adapt to the earlier forms of the virus. Thus, in the minds of the public, increasing the need for a vaccine cure instead of a natural one, less profitable one for white elites. Last point. So given all this, may I suggest that you ask an even more important question. Why has all this occurred when it has little to do with the science that we've always used and relied upon? Who stands to benefit from all this?
All right. Thank you, Daud, for that serious answer, for that serious question. I do want to say before we go, in memorial, we do want to pay our respects to some ADOS family that we lost. That is Little Richard, the architect of rock and roll, who did not hesitate to keep reminding you of that. Also, Betty Wright, songstress, writer, songwriter, musician, as well as Andre Harrell, who was a pioneer in ushering in acts like Mary J. Blige, Jodeci, and Sean Puffy Combs. There you have it, family. Another week, another show. Thanks for joining us on the Articles of ADOS podcast. Make sure to visit our website, articlesofados.com, where you can join our mailing list, see the show notes for today's episode, and to leave us a voice message to be featured on the show.
Now that you're family, we'd love it if you'd like our Facebook page and join our private Articles of ADOS group. This is where you can connect with other listeners, give feedback, and share articles you would like us to discuss. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, send us an email to listeners@articlesofados.com.
Be sure to tune in next Thursday for a new episode of Undiscussed News you may have missed. And join us live for great content and conversation Sundays at 8 p.m. on YouTube, Twitch, Periscope, and in our Facebook group, where we recap and discuss this week's episode. Until next time, family, stay safe, stay strong. Peace.